There you are, they're all in.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I would start as we are hitting 12 p.m. now. Tēnā koutou katoa, and welcome to another LinkOnline webinar. I am Mona Mohtari, Principal Government Advisor at Commercial Team in the Land Care Research, and welcome you all into this session. Today's speaker is Nick Rahiri Ruscrouch. He's a retired professor in ethnobotany and horticulture and a research fellow with the National Maori Research Centre and the Deputy Director for Maori and Pacifica at Bioprotection Aotearoa, a Centre for Research Excellence based at Lincoln University in Z. I would hand over to Susie Greenhalgh, Portfolio Leader in Society, Culture and Policy in Manaki Whenua Land Care Research. She will be providing a bit of background about this piece of work. Here you go, Susie.
Thanks, Mona. Really appreciate it, and welcome everyone. It's really quite exciting to know that the IPBES is coming out with some more guidance and assessments. And today we're hearing about the global assessment on transformative change. Manaki Whenua Land Care Research has been involved in IPBES for many years. We actually had a member of our staff was one of the first folks on the multidisciplinary expert panel, which actually helped. And he was involved with developing the conceptual framework around which all the reports then sort of flowed on from there. He was also the co-chair of the Indigenous and Local Knowledge Task Force as well in those early days, and actually helped facilitate quite a lot of the delivery of sort of Indigenous and local knowledge into the thematic assessment of pollination, pollinators and food production. So we've been here since the early days. After that staff member was involved, we have since been involved in other assessments, and the last big one we were involved in was a regional assessment report for Asia and the Pacific. And so it has been really exciting to see how IPBES has grown over time and the number of countries that are involved, and the fact that New Zealand has been part of that for a very long time. So it is exciting to have Nick here today to talk about one of the latest reports that is coming through. And I will hand over to Nick now, and he will give you a little bit more of a background on IPBES and then sort of the findings from this latest report that has come through.
I probably just give a quick housekeeping before Nick starts. Just a quick one. Is the webinar is recorded and will be made available online in the coming days. Also, the Q&A function is enabled live, you can see in the top left. So please ask your questions here and we will aim to answer these at the end of the presentation. Thank you so much. Handing over to you, Nick.
Well, kia ora no tātou. I've just got a whole lot of things happening on my screen. But my name is Nick Ruscrouch, and I was one of the authors on one of the chapters for the Transformative Change Report, which we'll come to in a moment. But I'm also currently the chair for the Indigenous Local Knowledge Committee with IPBES, and a bit of other work with UNESCO, all on the same sort of space. But I'll just pull up the screen, and can everybody see the slideshow now?
Yes, I can.
Right. So, in the interest of time, this is a reasonably short presentation, so we'll just sort of move into it. But a couple of slides just to give you some background on what IPBES is, but also to explain some of the information space that sits around it. So IPBES is the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. It's an independent intergovernmental body. Represents, I think, 148 member countries now. They've just had another one come through. And established by those states in 2012, so that's 13 years ago now. The overall objective, as you'll see, is to strengthen the science policy interface for the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. So an assessment, and there's regular assessments, there's a couple of new ones just starting now, but there was 2 recently completed, one on the Nexus and one on Transformative Change. And these are a review and evaluation of information that includes science and Indigenous and local knowledge on a topic, a specific topic or theme, in this case, transformative change, and sometimes geographically, but in this case, it was a global view. It's written by a multidisciplinary author group from around the world, 100 or so authors, and the authors have different roles or strategically different contributions into the report. So it includes a number of fellows, which are emerging sort of researchers, and developed typically over 2 to 3 years. So this last report was over 3 years, and I think the next one I'm involved in is 2. What it does is provide a knowledge base and options for action for policy and decision makers at all levels. So it's a contribution to those future sort of actions. Some of the completed assessments that some just been mentioned, and we won't go through all of these, but the pollinators report, regional assessments, the first global assessment, and they're about to move into the second global assessment in the next 12 months, values and valuation of nature, sustainable use of wild species, alien species, invasive alien species, the Nexus report, which was completed around the same time as this one, the Transformative Change report. So currently there's a few still happening, the business and biodiversity report, monitoring of biodiversity, spatial planning, and the second global assessment, which I said is coming up. Why isn't that moving forward?
And do you want to click back and right?
I've just got, now it's come forward now. So the what I'm going to do for this presentation is keep to the policy, the summary for policymakers, which is the overall summary from the report itself, because certainly in 20 minutes, 25 minutes, there's not a lot of time to go through the detail, but the summary is what the governments have effectively signed off on at the recent plenary. So it's the information that they've worked with. So the full title, the thematic assessment of the underlying causes of biodiversity loss and the determinants of transformative change and options for achieving the 2050 vision for biodiversity. So the report, as I said, was over 3 years, 21 to 24, 3 co-chairs and 101 authors. Those authors came from a very diverse background. The aim of this report was to assess different visions, scenarios and pathways for a sustainable world, and that includes the visions of Indigenous peoples and local communities, to look at how transformative change can occur and what obstacles it may face, and to look at the practical options for action to foster, accelerate and maintain transformative change. So during the 3-year period, a number of author meetings occur, and there's also side meetings. This picture on the slide is one of the side meetings for the Indigenous knowledge contribution, and this was at Columbia. So the assessment consists of a summary for policymakers, which is what we'll look at today, and it's drawn from 5 chapters. The first is more or less the definition, looking at what is transformative change and how it fits in a sustainable world. The second chapter, the visions of a sustainable world for both nature and people. The third chapter, which is the one I was involved in, is the how transformative change occurs. And the fourth chapter, overcoming the challenges of achieving transformative change. And then culminating in the 5th chapter, which is realising a sustainable world for nature and people, and what that means for transformative strategies, actions involved. And this whole report is then supported by a glossary, by a data space with all of the references and everything that's contributed into it. So there's also quite a number of contributing authors aside from the 101. Let's look at some of the key messages. So the summary for policymakers is say the one that is signed off effectively by the governments at the plenary, and the plenary for last year in Namibia. So the key messages that come from all of the chapters is what is presented to them, and in this case the summary was divided into 3 sections. The first is that transformative change, or the first statement out of sections, that transformative change is urgent, necessary and challenging, but it is possible. This is actions for transformative change can be developed. And the third, that enabling transformative change creates roles for everybody. So there's a role for every layer of society. You can find the SPM online. There's a link there which we provide afterwards, and new languages. But it's about 80 odd pages, so it's a report in itself, but it's very much worth having a look at for the detail that comes out of some of these summary points. So from the first section, the transformative change is necessary, urgent and challenging, but it is possible. So the key message, or one of the key messages, that transformative change is for a just and sustainable world is both urgent and necessary. And I think we all know this. This puts it into a report format where the governments have to sort of take it on board, I guess, but it's to address the global interconnected crises related to biodiversity loss, nature's decline, and the projected collapse of key ecosystem functions. All of those are key words, but I think the one to hold on to is that this is looking at it from a global perspective. So it's not, certainly from an ILK Indigenous space, it's not looking at it from a single government by government, but it's looking at it from a much bigger strategic perspective. The second key message is really about what is transformative change, because words often don't translate easily to people in different sectors, etc. It's defined as a fundamental system-wide shift in views, structures and practices. And the report identifies it's important to recognise and strengthen views, structures and practices that are already aligned with generating a just and sustainable world. And this, of course, draws from a lot of local communities, Indigenous peoples. But the key point out of this is not everybody needs to change. There are different levels of change, and there are different factors to change coming through. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach going forward. The second half of this key message is that there are 3 underlying causes of biodiversity loss. The first is the disconnection from and domination over nature and people. The second is a concentration of power and wealth. And the third is the prioritisation of short-term individual and material gains. I think they're all reasonably self-explanatory. Again, this report brings it to the fore. So the 4 key principles coming out of this key message that address the underlying causes, which the report identifies as being able to guide transformative change, are equity and justice, pluralism and inclusion. You'll see a note on the right-hand side that pluralism acknowledges the existence of different types of people who have different beliefs and opinions within the same society. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. Respectful and reciprocal human nature relationships. Again, the note on the right. So to move away from the relationships of extraction and exploitation and work more towards fostering values that show respect and solidarity, responsibility, etc. towards nature, and the space for adaptive learning and action. Another key message drawn out of the SPM, the key message number 4, is that there are 5 overarching challenges identified in the report to achieving transformative change. The first is that the relations of domination over nature and people, especially those that have emerged in colonial era, persist. The second is that there are economic and political inequalities. Third, that inadequate policies and unfit institutions exist in many places. That unsustainable consumption and production patterns, including individual habits and practices, exist. And the key in that is that there are different scales applied by different interests. So coming right down to the individual habit, right through to the commercial and the multinational scales. And the fifth challenge is the limited access to clean technologies and uncoordinated knowledge and innovation systems. So in many places around the world, they still don't have access to information in the way that we're familiar with, and they don't have access certainly to technologies in the way that we're familiar with. So there's very much a diversity that exists, and one of the issues to achieving transformative change is around how to address that inequalities that exist. The next key message from the first section was that weaving together diverse approaches and knowledge systems, including ILK, which is the Indigenous and local knowledge, enhances strategies and actions for transformative change. The message is that there are a diversity of philosophies, ethics of care, reciprocity, values and practices, all which have something to offer. And I think one of the challenges that came out of this report, certainly for a lot of academics, is looking at the different types of information that are out there, not just using the journal literature and those sort of easily accessible written forms to inform our knowledge and our policies going forward. So being able to access other forms of knowledge in different modes. The second section from the SPM, the strategies and actions to achieve transformative change. This diagram here is out of the summary. There's too much here to take on right now, but the 5 dark boxes show the 5 strategies that were identified in the report itself, and they're all determined to complement each other about achieving transformative change. So the first, for example, to conserve and regenerate places of value. Second, to drive systemic change in the sectors most responsible for the decline. Third, to transform economic systems for nature and equity. Fourth, to transform governance systems to be integrative and inclusive. And the fifth, to shift views and values to recognise human nature. I think all of that most people will be familiar with. Certainly in our part of the world, they're not new statements, but coming through in the report is important. So a key message out of the second section is that knowledge co-creation and recognition of plural forms of knowledge, worldviews and values is important. So an example is the consideration of ancestral, embodied or experiential knowledge, and the non-human perceptions and perspectives in conservation decision-making. So this quite clearly also involves the decolonising of academia and making space for ILK. So that's, again, how do we access the different types of knowledge and value those different types of knowledge in an appropriate way. There's an importance for co-production policy instruments, and the report identifies some key principles to trying to achieve this. One is the free, prior and informed consent of all contributors into policy, so allowing all interests to be able to contribute and be comfortable with how that contribution is then taken forward. Second, the recognition of customary law, which is quite variable around the world. The third, intellectual property rights. The fourth, the role of Indigenous data governance and sovereignty, which is still quite not as clear as it should be, and certainly hasn't been developed to an endpoint. And the fifth, the capacity building for the use of technology is a powerful transformative potential, but it needs to be consistently applied or consistently provided to all the interests. So the third section of the report is look at how we enable transformative change, and that there are roles for everybody in trying to achieve this. So the key message, number 13, was that what are the visions? What are we looking to achieve, and how do we ensure that those visions take notice of the community at large, of the people that are going to be affected or currently affected and that are looking for transformative change? How do we include the narratives and the stories and everything else into those visions so that we create desirable future states for both people and nature? How do we ensure that those visions are shaped by values and worldviews? And how do we ensure that the goals and the intentional efforts of all the different people that contribute can be used to achieve an end point, which is valuable for everybody. From this, there were 5 core themes that emerged from the assessment, and we looked at, this is in chapter 4, a whole lot of, they sort of contributed to a number of visions and contributions from around the world, and looked at what the themes were for people involved in this space or looking to contribute to this space. And some of the themes that are both issues but values that come through with it, the regenerative and circular economies need to be understood and considered or applied. There needs to be more recognition given to the community rights and empowerment and how that can be achieved, and remembering that this report is intended to contribute to policy development. Third, that there is a role for understanding both biodiversity and ecosystem health, and we know that's quite complicated and all geographically around the world. The fourth from these visions is that there is a role for that spiritual reconnection between humans and nature and behavioural change, recognising that all the different communities of interest often have a very personal or unique relationship to their natural estate or the nature estate, and somehow we need to build that into looking what the future can look like. And the fifth, that there's still a role for innovative business and technology. It's not to withdraw, that economic role. Another of the key messages is that transformative change is both system-wide and a whole of society or whole of government approach. So it's not, it's not just a one person or one group that have to come together to achieve this. It's across the board. So there's a considerable number of examples that exist internationally around collaborative approaches to achieving change or transformative change, and many of them are community-based, such as agroecology initiatives, and a couple of examples given on the right-hand side, some initiatives in North Patagonia for climate resilience, and then Africa around rice cultivation with using fish, ducks and trees as part of that system, or in East Africa, the push-pull cropping systems that are applied. So there's some really good examples of very diverse approaches to systems approach with nature and how we can use those systems to create change. Another key message, which should be no surprise, is that governments are powerful enablers of transformative change. And this is particularly apparent when they foster, or they can foster, policy coherence. So it's trying to really sort of take on board the role of governments and moving forward. They also enact and they can enact and enforce stronger regulations. They can deploy innovative economic and fiscal tools, also eliminate or phase out reform environmentally harmful subsidies. So there's all roles at that government level, that these are examples of where the report saw that they had roles to play. And most importantly, that there's the opportunity to promote international cooperation. And again, this report looks at the strategic view of transformative change and draws from the sort of the detail of examples that are happening around the world to say what can work and how do we move forward. So coming towards the end, but some of the gaps in knowledge as indicated in the report. The first is the metrics and indicators. There's clearly a gap in many parts of the world having information that can be drawn on or utilised, and that includes the indicators based on different knowledge systems, worldviews or values. The second is the vision development and participatory processes that exist, and there's clearly a gap in involving different communities, including Indigenous peoples and other local communities. The science policy relations, the incorporation of different knowledge systems into transdisciplinary learning processes, and understanding the underlying power structures. And I think power structures is a key word here, and that there are constantly, the feedback is on the power imbalance that exists in many relationships. Fourth is there is an imagination gap that and in many ways we want to encourage that view of living in harmony with nature rather than competing with it. And the fifth, the cultural insights and social dimensions that exist. So how do different cultures and societies envisage positive futures where both humans and nature are integrated harmoniously, for the want of better words? So folks, that's me. It's a short presentation, but kia ora mara, and thank you. And I'll hand it back to our hosts for, I think I'll just stop sharing the screen.
Cool. Thank you so much, Nick, for the great and informative presentation. Fantastic. We've got 179 people. It's showing up there. Great number of attendees. I can say one question only in the Q&A. Is if you guys have any other questions, please just pop it there in the Q&A. The only one I can say is from Amanda asking about, did Aotearoa sign off on this at government level? If you have any comments on this, Nick.
The plenary is signed off by all the government participants with IPBES. So when it's signed off at the plenary level, which was in Namibia in December, that's when all of the governments have come to a consensus to sign it off. So yes, we're included at that point of the report. So and it wasn't a straightforward sign off. There were different governments have different priorities that they were concerned with how they came through in the report. Brazil, for example, with the impact on some of their native forestry systems and all of that, but it was signed off by the plenary December 24th, so New Zealand was part of that.
Cool. Thank you, Nick. Is there any other question?
I just added a question. There's one more that's come in. Nick, it strikes me that many of the changes that were being talked about, especially on that slide about the transformative changes, are really deep societal changes, and they're really, really hard to achieve. And I think all of us aspire to make those kinds of changes. And I'd be interested to know whether there was any kinds of initiatives or discussions that were between the authors or maybe people in the plenary about how to sort of tackle some of those really deep changes.
Good question. The plenary didn't sort of drill down to that level. I think the plenary was, with two reports going through, the Nexus one as well, was quite an intense 2 or 3 days. And the authors from this report are still sort of working together to take the outcomes into various forums and different formats. I'm on the ILK committee, so I'm the chair of that, and one of our roles of this going forward is to ensure that the outcomes are filtered out to the various communities who don't ordinarily sort of get access to this sort of high level reporting. There's always going to be an issue trying to get a sort of an agreement from 150 odd governments of anything really, but until it's put into a report format, that means it's consistently messaged to all of those governments, the next steps are not really sort of clear. So I think there's a lot of hope that it will start to filter through, that it will look to drawing on wider information knowledge systems going forward, but it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be one of those things that just kept working or kept worked on by the various sort of parties that are involved. The authors are certainly very keen to keep it in front of mind, and yeah, it's constantly tracked, and and we've got IPBES are very good in their communication space. They can, if people want to take this messaging forward, we can very easily sort of connect them to the communication space to have some clear sort of slides or messages to take forward, and that's probably the key point now, is how we communicate the report out.
Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you. I see the other questions are coming up now. I probably go to this one, and then we probably need to log off. So before then, the question is from Joanne Perry. What do you think is one of the most important thing New Zealand could do to transform faster than we are presently moving.
Yeah.
If you have comments.
Sometimes, and this is probably more me than the report itself, but sometimes I think we just need to actually get on and do some things without waiting for the policy space to tell us how to design that. So sometimes it's the lead by example, and that's not necessarily as a country, but that's groups within New Zealand who have got really good examples of how they're facilitating change, highlighting those examples and giving people the opportunity to learn and take from what's happening elsewhere. But the second is and it was quite clear in this process that the Pacific, for example, is not as visible as much of the rest of the world in these processes, and we probably need to look at how we can raise that profile even further. So we know that there's a lot of implications, especially around climate and sea issues and all of that. So how do we sort of put ourselves in the front of the space so that we are taken more notice of, I guess.
Right, thank you, Nick. Unfortunately, we are hitting the time, so I would like to thank you everyone to join us today. Thank you, Susie and Nick, for the great work and presentation both. And just mentioning any unanswered question will be answered and shared with the email recording of the presentations, and the recording will also load into the YouTube. And please keep an eye on our website for the upcoming LinkOnline webinars. So we'll be in touch, and thank you everyone, and see you later in the next sessions. You have a great day.
Kia ora mai.